December 9, 1945. Germany, the Cadillac's brakes were working perfectly that morning. The army investigators checked them 3 times. The road was clear. The weather was cold but dry. No ice. No fog. Just a straight highway outside Mannheim, but somehow, at exactly 11:45 a.m., a 2-ton army truck appeared from nowhere and crashed into the general's car at low speed. The impact was minor. The truck driver walked away without a scratch. The other passengers had minor bruises. Only one man was paralyzed from the neck down, General George S. Patton Jr., the man who had crushed the Nazi war machine with his tanks, lay in the back seat with a broken neck. Conscious. Unable to move. Staring at the roof of the car. 9 days earlier, he had told a room full of reporters something that made Washington go silent. Something about the Soviets. Something about a war that hadn't started yet, something that some people didn't want anyone to hear, but to understand why that accident was so convenient, you need to go back. Not to December 1945. Further back. To the moment when a general's career was destroyed by a single slap, August 3, 1943. Sicily, the tent was hot. The kind of Mediterranean heat that makes your uniform stick to your skin and your thoughts feel heavy. Patton walked through the 15th Evacuation Hospital with his pearl-handled revolvers gleaming at his sides, his posture perfect, his face hard. He was inspecting wounded soldiers. Doing what generals do. Checking morale. Showing the men that their commander cared. Then he saw Private Charles H. Cole. The soldier was sitting on a cot. No visible wounds. No bandages. No blood. Just sitting there, head in his hands, shaking. "What's wrong with you?" Patton's voice cut through the tent like a knife. "I guess I can't take it, sir," Cole whispered. The general's face turned red. His jaw clenched. Around them, men with missing limbs, men with shrapnel wounds, men dying from infections, watched in silence. "You what?" "I can't take it anymore, General." What happened next took 3 seconds. 3 seconds that would cost Patton the greatest military operation in history. He slapped the soldier across the face. "You coward!" Patton screamed. "You're a disgrace. I won't have cowards in my army." He pulled out one of his revolvers. Officers rushed forward. The general was dragged out of the tent, still shouting, still furious. Private Cole sat there, tears streaming down his face, his cheek red from the impact. What nobody knew in that moment, what Patton himself didn't realize, was that Cole had chronic dysentery and malaria. He had a fever of 102 degrees. He was genuinely sick, but more importantly, what nobody could predict was that this single moment of rage would change the entire course of World War II. Because 8 months later, when the Allies planned the biggest invasion in human history, the greatest tank commander America had ever produced would be sitting in England, sidelined, watching other men lead the charge. The slap heard around the world was about to cost the Allies thousands of lives. But wait. Before we get to D-Day, you need to understand who Patton really was. Because this wasn't just some angry general. This was a man who believed he had fought in previous lives. George Smith Patton Jr. was born on November 11, 1885, in California. His family was military aristocracy. His grandfather was a Confederate colonel killed in the Civil War. His father graduated from VMI. War wasn't just in his blood, it was his religion. As a child, Patton couldn't read until he was 12 due to dyslexia. But he memorized entire books by having them read to him. Homer's Iliad, Caesar's Gallic Wars, Napoleon's campaigns. He didn't just study military history, he lived it in his imagination. At West Point, he was average academically but exceptional in one thing: he believed he was destined for greatness. Not hoped. Believed. With an almost religious certainty. "I have fought in many battles," he once told his wife, in previous lives. He claimed to have been a Roman legionnaire, a soldier with Napoleon, a Viking warrior. Most people thought he was eccentric. Some thought he was crazy. He was neither. He was something else entirely, a man who understood that war was an art form, and tanks were his paintbrush. 1918. France. Young Colonel Patton stood in the mud of World War I, watching the first American tanks roll across no man's land. Clumsy. Slow. Breaking down constantly. Most officers saw them as expensive failures. Patton saw the future. "The tank is the weapon that will win the next war," he wrote in a memo that his superiors ignored. "Speed, shock, and firepower. That's all that matters." For the next 20 years, while the Army focused on infantry and artillery, Patton focused on tanks. He studied German panzer tactics. He read Guderian and Rommel. He developed theories about rapid armored warfare that the American military thought were fantasies. Then 1939 happened. Poland fell in 27 days. France fell in 6 weeks. The Blitzkrieg, lightning war, proved Patton right about everything, but by then, he was 54 years old. Most men his age were preparing for retirement. Patton was preparing for the war he'd spent his entire life training to fight, and when Pearl Harbor brought America into the war in December 1941, Patton's moment finally arrived, November 8, 1942. North Africa, the desert was burning. Not metaphorically. Literally. German and Italian vehicles were on fire across the Tunisian plains as Patton's tank smashed through Rommel's defensive lines. This was Operation Torch. America's first major offensive against Nazi forces. And it was going badly. The American troops were green. Inexperienced. Getting chewed up by Rommel's Afrika Korps, veterans who had been fighting in the desert for 2 years. At Kasserine Pass, the Americans broke and ran. It was a disaster. Eisenhower made a phone call. "George, I need you to take over 2 corps. They're falling apart. Fix them." Patton arrived in Tunisia like a hurricane. The first thing he did was change the uniform code. Every soldier had to wear a helmet, even in camp. Ties had to be properly knotted. Boots had to be polished. Officers who didn't enforce discipline were fired on the spot. The soldiers hated him immediately. "We're fighting a war, not a fashion show," they muttered, but Patton understood something the soldiers didn't. Discipline in camp created discipline in battle. An army that looked sharp would fight sharp. Within 3 weeks, 2 corps was transformed. The same units that had run at Kasserine were now attacking with coordinated armor and infantry. The Germans started retreating. Rommel himself said, "The Americans have found themselves a real commander." By May 1943, North Africa was liberated. Patton was a hero. Newspapers called him "Old Blood and Guts," though his soldiers had a different phrase, "Our blood, his guts." He didn't care what they called him. He cared about winning. And now, with North Africa secure, the next target was obvious: Sicily. The gateway to Europe. This is where Patton's genius would shine brightest, and where his demons would destroy him. July 10, 1943. Operation Husky. 2 Allied armies landed on Sicily. The British 8th Army under Montgomery on the east coast. The American 7th Army under Patton on the west. The plan was simple: Montgomery would drive north to Messina, the key city. Patton would protect Montgomery's flank. Patton hated the plan. Being Montgomery's bodyguard wasn't war, it was an insult. So he changed the plan without telling anyone. While Montgomery's forces got bogged down in defensive positions, Patton's tanks went on a rampage. They didn't protect the flank, they raced across the entire western half of Sicily at speeds the Germans thought were impossible. "How fast can tanks move on these mountain roads?" a staff officer asked. "Find out," Patton replied. His columns moved day and night. No rest. No stops. Soldiers slept on moving vehicles. Tanks refueled while rolling. It was insane. It was brilliant. In 1 week, Patton's 7th Army covered more ground than Montgomery's 8th Army covered in 3 weeks. the Americans reached Palermo, Sicily's capital, in a blitzkrieg that stunned both allies and enemies. Then came the race to Messina. Patton called Montgomery on the radio. "I'm taking Messina. See you there." Montgomery was furious. Eisenhower was furious. The British High Command demanded Patton be stopped, but Patton's tanks were already at the city gates. On August 17, American forces entered Messina hours before the British arrived. Patton stood at the entrance, grinning, waiting for Montgomery's jeep to arrive. "What took you so long, Monty?" he asked with mock concern. It was the greatest moment of his career. The newspapers loved it. The soldiers loved it. America had a genuine war hero who could match the German generals blow for blow. And then, 3 days later, a reporter named Drew Pearson published a story about what happened in that medical tent. The slapping incident exploded in the American press. "Patton beats shell-shocked soldier," read the headlines. Senators called for his dismissal. Mothers of soldiers wrote angry letters. Eisenhower was under massive pressure to fire his most successful commander. Patton was forced to apologize publicly. To the soldier. To the medical staff. To the entire 7th Army, assembled in formation while their general stood before them and admitted he was wrong. It was the most humiliating moment of his life. "I apologize," he said, his voice barely controlled. "My passion for winning made me forget the greatest victory is taking care of our men." Some soldiers accepted the apology. Others never forgave him, but the damage was done. When planning for D-Day began in late 1943, Patton's name wasn't on the list of commanders. Eisenhower chose Omar Bradley to lead the American ground forces. Bradley, Patton's former subordinate. Bradley, who Patton had trained. Bradley, who was careful, methodical, and would never slap a soldier. Patton was sent to England to command a fake army. Operation Fortitude was one of the greatest deceptions in military history. The Allies needed the Germans to believe the D-Day invasion would happen at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. So they created an entire Phantom Army group stationed in southeast England, aimed at Calais, and they put Patton in command of this ghost army. Wooden tanks. Inflatable trucks. Fake radio traffic. The Germans, who respected Patton more than any Allied commander, saw his name on the fake organization charts and believed it. If Patton is at Calais, that's where they'll invade, German intelligence reported. So Patton spent the spring of 1944 commanding an army that didn't exist, while the real invasion was planned without him. He watched the news from England. Watched Bradley prepare troops. Watched Montgomery brief strategy. Watched other men prepare for the operation that should have been his to lead. "They're using me as bait," he told his staff bitterly. "I'm a decoy." On June 6, 1944, while American soldiers stormed Omaha Beach and died by the thousands, Patton was in England, pacing his office, listening to radio reports. The invasion was succeeding. But barely. The hedgerow country of Normandy was perfect defensive terrain. German forces were containing the Allied breakout. Bradley's troops were stuck. For 6 weeks, the Allies fought for every field, every stone wall, every tiny French village. The advance that was supposed to liberate France in weeks was measured in yards per day. Eisenhower looked at the map and made a decision. A controversial decision. A decision that proved even he knew who the best commander really was. On July 28, 1944, Patton received a phone call. "George, I'm giving you 3rd Army. Get over here and break us out of this mess." Patton smiled for the first time in months. "I'll have Paris by the end of August," he said. Nobody believed him. August 1, 1944. Operation Cobra. Patton's 3rd Army arrived in France like a thunderstorm. Within hours of taking command, he had reorganized the entire offensive. No more cautious advances. No more careful consolidation. "We're going to attack in every direction at once," he told his confused staff. "The Germans won't know where to defend." "Sir, that's tactically impossible," an officer protested. "Watch me." On August 1, 3rd Army broke through the German lines near Avranches. Instead of stopping to consolidate the breakthrough, which is what the textbooks said to do, Patton sent his entire army through the gap at full speed. 8 divisions. 200,000 men. Thousands of tanks and vehicles. All racing through a narrow corridor only a few miles wide. The Germans tried to counterattack and close the gap. They failed. Patton's columns were already 50 miles into French territory, moving so fast that German commanders couldn't track them on maps. "Where is the American army?" a panicked German radio message asked. "Everywhere," came the reply. Within 2 weeks, Patton's Third Army had advanced further than any army in modern warfare. They liberated town after town. The French citizens came out waving American flags, throwing flowers, kissing soldiers, and Patton, standing in the turret of his command tank, wearing his polished helmet and those famous ivory-handled revolvers, looked like he was born for this moment. But then, on August 25th, as his lead tanks approached Paris, the radio crackled with a message that made Patton's blood boil. "All Third Army units, halt. Do not advance further until ordered." Patton grabbed the radio handset. "What? Who gave that order?" "SHAEF, sir. Supreme Headquarters." Eisenhower had stopped him. Stopped his entire army. Right at the moment of ultimate victory. Why? Politics. The French wanted Charles de Gaulle's Free French forces to liberate Paris, not the Americans. Image mattered. Symbolism mattered. The French needed to liberate their own capital for national pride. So Patton's army, which could have taken Paris in hours, sat outside the city for 2 days while French units went in first. Patton was furious. "We're fighting a war, not staging a parade." But he obeyed. Grudgingly, Paris was liberated on August 25th by French forces, with American tanks waiting politely outside, and Patton looked at the map of Europe. Paris was free. The German army was in full retreat. The road to Germany was open. "Give me the fuel and I'll be in Berlin in 2 weeks, he told Eisenhower. It wasn't bragging. His advance rate proved it was possible. The German defensive lines were shattered. This was the moment to strike, to end the war before winter. Eisenhower looked at the map. Then he made a decision that would haunt military historians forever. "No, George. We're stopping to resupply. The advance has outrun our logistics." Logistics. Patton exploded. "My men can live on air if it means ending this war." But the order was final. Third Army would stop. Fuel and ammunition would be diverted to Montgomery's forces in the north, who were planning a cautious, methodical advance through Belgium. Patton's tanks, the most successful armored force in the European theater, ran out of gas, not because of German action. Because of American orders, and as his vehicles sat motionless outside Paris, the Germans used the pause to rebuild their defensive lines. The Siegfried Line. The West Wall. Fortified positions that would cost thousands of Allied lives to break through. The war that could have ended in September 1944 would drag on until May 1945. Patton never forgave Eisenhower for that decision. And privately, he blamed someone else, Montgomery, the British commander who always seemed to get priority for resources. "Monty couldn't fight his way out of a paper bag," Patton muttered. "But he's British, so I gives him everything." The rivalry between Patton and Montgomery was already bitter. It was about to become legendary. But just when Patton thought the war was becoming a boring slog, the Germans did something unexpected. December 16, 1944. The Ardennes Forest. At 5:30 a.m., the entire German Western Front erupted in the largest German offensive since 1940. 3 German armies, 29 divisions, over 400,000 men, smashed into the weakest part of the Allied line. The target: split the Allied armies, capture the port of Antwerp, force a negotiated peace. The operation was called Unternehmen Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine. The Allies called it the Battle of the Bulge. American units were overrun. Entire regiments surrendered. The Germans advanced 30 miles in 3 days. Panic spread through SHAEF headquarters. The 101st Airborne Division, isolated in the Belgian town of Bastogne, was completely surrounded. 7,000 American paratroopers facing 50,000 German troops. On December 22, the German commander sent a formal surrender ultimatum to the American forces in Bastogne. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe read the message, thought for a moment, and gave his reply in one word: nuts. The German officer delivering the ultimatum didn't understand American slang. "What does this mean?" he asked. "It means go to hell," the American translator explained. So the 101st prepared to fight to the last man. They were running out of ammunition. No food. No medical supplies. Surrounded on all sides by German armor, they had maybe 48 hours before they were completely overrun. At SHAEF headquarters, Eisenhower called an emergency meeting. "We need to relieve Bastogne immediately. Who can get there fastest?" Every commander looked at the map. Bastogne was 100 miles from the nearest Allied unit. The roads were packed with snow. German forces controlled everything in between. "Impossible," Montgomery said. "We need at least a week to organize a relief column." Eisenhower turned to Patton. "George." Patton had been studying the map silently. He looked up. 48 hours. The room went silent. "That's impossible," someone said. "You'd have to disengage from your current offensive, turn your entire army 90 degrees north, attack through winter conditions, break through German lines, and fight your way to Bastogne. In 2 days." 48 hours, Patton repeated. "I'll have them in 48 hours." Nobody believed him. It violated every principle of military logistics and planning. You couldn't just turn an army of 250,000 men on that short notice, except Patton had already planned for this exact scenario. 3 days earlier, while everyone else was focused on the attack, he had his staff prepare contingency plans for a German offensive. "I knew they'd try something desperate," he explained later. "Cornered animals always attack." On December 22, at the exact moment McAuliffe was saying "nuts" to the Germans, Patton's Third Army began the most remarkable maneuver in military history. 3 entire divisions, 90,000 men, disengaged from combat, turned north, and began attacking toward Bastogne through ice, snow, and German defensive positions. The Germans didn't think it was possible. Hell, most American commanders didn't think it was possible. On December 26, exactly 48 hours later, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams' tank smashed through the German lines and reached Bastogne. The 101st Airborne was saved. Patton had done the impossible. Again, but here's what the history books don't tell you: Patton wasn't just saving American soldiers. He was proving a point. Every time Montgomery said something was impossible, Patton made it happen. Every time the British commanders advocated for caution, Patton showed that speed won wars, and as Third Army pushed the Germans back through January and February 1945, Patton became convinced of something that would eventually get him killed: the Allies were fighting the wrong enemy. It started with small observations. Soviet forces moving into Eastern Europe weren't liberating countries, they were occupying them. The Red Army's treatment of German civilians was brutal beyond anything Patton had seen, and as American and Soviet forces approached each other from opposite sides of Germany, Patton started asking uncomfortable questions. "What happens after we defeat Germany?" he asked his staff. "Do we really think Stalin is going to give back Poland? Czechoslovakia? All of Eastern Europe?" His officers didn't have answers. Nobody wanted to think about it. The war wasn't even over yet, but Patton was thinking about it constantly. On April 12, 1945, President Roosevelt died. Harry Truman became president. The war in Europe was in its final days, and Patton started saying things in public that made Washington very, very nervous. April 25, 1945. The Elbe River. American and Soviet forces met at the Elbe River in Germany. It was supposed to be a moment of celebration. Allies meeting in the heart of Nazi Germany. The war almost over, Patton stood on the western bank, watching Soviet tanks and soldiers on the eastern side. His face was hard. His jaw clenched. A Soviet general approached for the ceremonial meeting. Cameras flashed. Translators facilitated the carefully scripted greetings. The Soviet general smiled and raised his vodka glass. To our great alliance. Patton raised his glass but didn't smile. He looked the Soviet officer directly in the eyes. "Enjoy it while it lasts," Patton said quietly. "Because when this war is over, we're going to have to fight you next." The translator froze. He didn't translate the comment. The Soviet general, not speaking English, just smiled and drank, but the American reporters heard it. And some of them wrote it down. Back at headquarters, Patton was more explicit. "We've defeated the wrong enemy," he told his staff officers. "We should have let the Germans fight the Russians. Better yet, we should be fighting the Russians right now, while our army is intact and theirs is exhausted." Someone asked, "Are you suggesting we attack the Soviet Union?" "I'm suggesting that in 10 years, we're going to regret stopping at the Elbe." It got worse. In May, after Germany surrendered, Patton proposed something that made everyone in Washington question his sanity. "We should rearm German POWs and use them with us to push the Soviets back to Russia." He was serious. Completely serious. The German army knows how to fight Russians. We don't. They have experienced officers, trained soldiers, and they hate the Soviets more than they hate us now. Give them their weapons back, put them under American command, and we could be in Moscow by winter. The suggestion was immediately classified and buried. Eisenhower personally told Patton to never say that again, to anyone, but Patton couldn't stop himself. May 8, 1945. VE Day, the war in Europe was over. Nazi Germany had surrendered. Celebrations erupted across the Allied world. Patton was placed in charge of the American occupation zone in Bavaria. He was supposed to implement denazification, removing Nazi party members from positions of power and bringing war criminals to justice. Instead, Patton did something that horrified Washington. He started appointing former Nazi officials to administrative positions. "They're the only ones who know how to run things," he explained when questioned. "You want me to govern Bavaria with street sweepers?" Reporters asked him about the Nazi party members in his administration. "The Nazi thing is just like a Democratic or Republican thing back home," Patton said dismissively. "These people aren't criminals. They were just following orders." The press exploded. Eisenhower was furious. Truman was furious. Patton was ordered to hold a press conference and clarify his comments. Instead, he made it worse. "I don't see why we're making such a fuss about denazification," he said. "We're treating these Germans like criminals when we should be treating the Soviets like the threat they are." He went further. "The Soviet Union is an evil empire. Stalin is no better than Hitler. And we're going to regret making nice with them. Remember, this is 1945. The Soviet Union is America's ally. Stalin is Uncle Joe in the press." The Cold War hasn't started yet, officially, but Patton saw it coming. And he wouldn't shut up about it. In September 1945, Eisenhower had enough. Patton was relieved of command of Third Army and given a largely ceremonial position overseeing military history documentation. It was a humiliating demotion. The greatest battlefield commander in American history was being sidelined to write reports. Patton knew why. "They're scared of me," he told his wife in a letter. "Scared I'll say something that disrupts their precious alliance with Stalin." He was right to be suspicious. His phone conversations were being monitored. His letters were being read. Intelligence officers were keeping files on everything he said, and Patton kept saying dangerous things. November 1945. Patton gave an interview to a group of reporters that would seal his fate. "I understand the necessity for weapons now more than ever," he said. "We're going to have to fight the Soviets. There's no way around it. And we should do it now, while we have the armies in place and the will to fight." He continued, The difficulty in understanding the Russians is that we do not take cognizance of the fact that they are not people but a barbarous Asiatic horde. The only way to stop them is with force. The interview was published in newspapers across America. Politicians demanded his court-martial. Soviet officials called him a warmonger and fascist sympathizer. On November 10, Eisenhower told Patton he was being sent home. "You're done, George. The army doesn't need you anymore. Go home. Retire. Write your memoirs." Patton was devastated. His entire identity was the military. War was his purpose. And now, at 60 years old, he was being forced out. He requested permission to stay in Germany through December to close out his affairs. Permission was granted. Patton planned to leave Germany on December 10, 1945. He would fly back to the United States, retire from the army, and fade into obscurity, but on December 9, one day before his departure, he decided to go pheasant hunting with his chief of staff, Major General Hobart Gay. They left headquarters at 9 a.m. in Patton's Cadillac limousine. The driver was PFC Horace Woodring. Gay sat in the back with Patton. The plan was simple: drive to a hunting area near Mannheim, spend a few hours hunting, return in time for dinner. At 11:45 a.m., on a straight, clear road, a 2-ton army truck driven by Technical Sergeant Robert L. Thompson suddenly turned left directly into the path of Patton's car. The vehicles collided at low speed. The impact was minor. The truck was barely damaged. The Cadillac had a dented fender. Woodring and Thompson were uninjured. Gay had minor cuts from broken glass, but Patton, sitting in the back seat, was hurled forward by the impact. His head struck a metal partition. He collapsed back into his seat, conscious but unable to move. "I think I've broken my neck," he said calmly. He had. His cervical vertebrae were fractured. His spinal cord was severely damaged. He was paralyzed from the neck down. At the hospital, doctors confirmed complete paralysis. No hope of recovery. He would never walk again. Never move his arms. Never command troops. For a man like Patton, it was worse than death. But here's what makes the accident suspicious: the details don't add up. The Army's official investigation concluded it was a simple accident. Driver error. No foul play, but consider, the truck driver, Sergeant Thompson, claimed he didn't see Patton's large Cadillac on a straight, clear road in daylight. The impact was so minor that everyone else in both vehicles was fine. Only Patton, sitting in the back seat, was injured, with the exact type of injury that would leave him alive but completely incapacitated. Thompson was never court-martialed or disciplined for the accident that critically injured the Army's most famous general. The accident happened exactly one day before Patton was scheduled to leave Germany permanently. In the weeks before the accident, Patton had told multiple people he believed he was in danger. "They want to silence me," he told his wife. No photographs were taken of the accident scene, which was unusual for an incident involving a 3-star general. The truck disappeared from Army records immediately after the accident. Its location and final disposition are unknown. Was it murder? A Soviet assassination? An American intelligence operation to silence a general who was threatening the fragile post-war alliance? Or was it just a tragic accident? We'll never know for certain. Because 12 days later, Patton died, December 21, 1945. 5:50 p.m., General George S. Patton Jr. died at the 130th Station Hospital in Heidelberg, Germany. The official cause of death: pulmonary edema and congestive heart failure, complications from his paralysis, but his personal physician later raised questions. Patton had been improving. His vital signs were stable. He was conscious, talking, making plans for his return to the United States in a special medical transport. Then, suddenly, he deteriorated and died within hours. Some historians believe he was euthanized at his own request. He had told staff he didn't want to live as a paralyzed man. Others believe he was murdered in the hospital to ensure his silence. The truth died with him. He was buried in the Luxembourg American Cemetery, among the soldiers of 3rd Army who had died under his command. He didn't want to be buried in the United States, away from his men. His grave is marked with a simple white cross, identical to the thousands of other crosses in that cemetery. No special monument. No elaborate memorial, just George S. Patton Jr., General, 3rd Army. So what really happened? Here's what we know for certain: Patton was right about the Soviets. Within 5 years of his death, the Cold War began. Within 10 years, Soviet tanks were crushing uprisings in Eastern Europe. Within 15 years, the Berlin Wall was built. Everything Patton predicted came true. We also know that Patton's plan to rearm German POWs and attack the Soviet Union, while shocking, wasn't entirely crazy. In 1945-46, the U.S. military actually developed contingency plans for war with the Soviets. Operation Unthinkable was the British version, and it looked remarkably similar to what Patton proposed, but officially, these plans were never implemented. The alliance with Stalin held. The Cold War remained cold, mostly, and Patton. He became a legend. A hero. The greatest American battlefield commander since Ulysses S. Grant, but he also became a cautionary tale about speaking truth to power. About what happens when a soldier becomes too popular, too outspoken, too dangerous to the political establishment. The final twist came in 1979. Douglas Bazata, a former OSS, Office of Strategic Services, operative, gave a confession at a military reunion. He claimed he had been ordered to assassinate Patton in December 1945. According to Bazata, he was told that Patton had become a political liability and needed to be eliminated. The plan was to stage an accident that would leave Patton alive but incapacitated, allowing him to die naturally in the hospital, avoiding suspicion. Bazata claimed he arranged the truck collision and later administered poison in the hospital to finish the job. He provided details about the operation that weren't public knowledge. He named his CIA handler. He described the planning meetings, but he offered no physical proof. No documents. No corroboration from other sources. Was Bazata telling the truth? Or was he a conspiracy theorist seeking attention? The U.S. government refused to investigate. The Army stated the case was closed, and so the mystery remains. Here's what we can say for certain: George S. Patton Jr. was a brilliant, flawed, complicated man. He was a genius at armored warfare and a disaster at personal relationships. He inspired fierce loyalty and intense hatred, often from the same people. He slapped a soldier and lost D-Day. He rescued Bastogne and became immortal. He saw the Cold War coming before anyone else. He died in suspicious circumstances that have never been fully explained, and whether his death was an accident, an assassination, or something in between, one thing is clear: the general who wanted to attack Russia with Nazi prisoners said too much, at the wrong time, to the wrong people, and 9 days later, he was paralyzed. 12 days after that, he was dead. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can be is right too soon. But to truly understand Patton's death, we need to go deeper. Back to the beginning. To the boy who believed he was born to fight wars that hadn't happened yet. 1885. San Gabriel Valley, California. Little Georgie Patton couldn't read. At age 8, when other children were reading simple books, Georgie stared at pages full of meaningless symbols. The letters jumbled together. The words made no sense. His parents were terrified. Was their son intellectually disabled? In the 1890s, learning disabilities weren't understood. A child who couldn't read was considered mentally deficient, but Georgie wasn't deficient. He was dyslexic, a condition that wouldn't be properly identified for another 50 years. His father, George Smith Patton Sr., made a decision that would shape history. Instead of sending his son to school where he would fail and be humiliated, he taught him at home using an unconventional method. He read to him. Every day. For hours. Not children's books. War histories: the Iliad, the Odyssey, Caesar's commentaries, Plutarch's Lives, Napoleon's memoirs. Young Georgie would sit for hours, eyes closed, listening to tales of ancient battles. He memorized them word for word. He could recite entire passages about Alexander the Great's campaigns, Hannibal crossing the Alps, Caesar in Gaul. "You come from warriors," his father told him. Your great-grandfather died at Gettysburg fighting for Virginia. Your grandfather charged with picket at Cemetery Ridge. War is in your blood, son. But it was more than family history that shaped Georgie. It was something stranger. By age 10, Georgie Patton was having vivid dreams, not normal childhood dreams. Detailed, historically accurate visions of ancient battlefields. He would describe Roman formations in technical detail he'd never been taught. He talked about fighting at Kenny with Hannibal's army. He claimed he remembered dying on the field at Crécy during the 100 Years' War. I was there, he insisted. I remember the English longbows. The mud. The French knights falling. His parents thought he had an overactive imagination, fueled by all those military histories, but Georgie believed something else. He had lived before. Many times. Always as a soldier. Always in battle. I don't think I've lived before, he told his aunt when he was 12. I know I have. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't childhood fantasy. Patton carried this belief his entire life. As an adult general, he would visit battlefields in Europe and describe terrain features and tactical positions that weren't visible anymore, but which historians later confirmed had existed centuries earlier. At Langres in France in 1918, Patton described the layout of a Roman military camp that had been on that spot 2,000 years earlier. He had never studied the history of that specific location. He just knew. Was it reincarnation? Genetic memory? An unusually vivid historical imagination. Patton didn't care what people called it. He knew what he knew. He had been a warrior in previous lives, and he would be a warrior in this one. The question was, how? 1903. Virginia Military Institute. At 17, Georgie finally learned to read fluently. His dyslexia never disappeared, but he developed coping mechanisms. He could memorize anything he heard. He could visualize terrain and tactics with perfect clarity. He applied to West Point, the most prestigious military academy in America. He failed the entrance exam. Specifically, he failed mathematics. His dyslexia made mathematical symbols especially difficult. He could plan complex military operations in his head, but he couldn't pass algebra. Devastated, he enrolled at VMI, Virginia Military Institute, where his father and grandfather had studied. He spent 1 year there, drilling constantly, studying every military text he could find, preparing to reapply to West Point. In 1904, he applied again. This time, he passed West Point, 1904-1909. Cadet Patton was not an exceptional student. His grades were average. He struggled with academic subjects. He was held back a year because of poor performance in mathematics, but in military tactics, riding, and fencing. He was extraordinary. He became obsessed with sword fighting. Not the formal, sporting fencing taught at West Point, but real combat swordsmanship. He studied French cavalry manuals. He practiced for hours every day until his hands bled. In 1912, he competed in the Stockholm Olympics in the modern pentathlon, shooting, fencing, swimming, riding, and running. He finished 5th overall. But here's the controversial part. In the pistol shooting event, Patton was accused of missing the target entirely on one shot. He insisted the bullet went through a hole made by a previous shot, a perfect shot that didn't register because it went through the same hole. The judges didn't believe him. He wasn't awarded the points. If they had believed him, he would have won the gold medal. Patton never forgot that injustice. For the rest of his life, he believed he was the rightful Olympic champion, cheated by judges who didn't understand perfection when they saw it. It was a preview of his relationship with authority. He was always right, and everyone else was always wrong. 1916. Mexico. 2nd Lieutenant Patton's first combat experience came not in Europe, but on the U.S.-Mexico border during the punitive expedition against Pancho Villa. Villa's raiders had attacked the town of Columbus, New Mexico, killing American citizens. General John J. Pershing led a force into Mexico to capture Villa. Patton, serving as Pershing's aide, volunteered for every dangerous mission. He wanted combat. He needed it. On May 14, 1916, Patton led a motorized patrol to a ranch suspected of harboring Villa's officers. 3 cars. 15 soldiers. Patton in the lead vehicle. They arrived at the ranch and began searching. Suddenly, 3 armed men burst from the building on horseback. Patton drew his ivory-handled revolver, a gift from his wife, and fired. The first rider fell. The second turned to flee. Patton shot him in the back. The third man tried to return fire. Patton shot him too. All 3 men died. One of them was Julio Cardenas, Villa's personal bodyguard and a captain in his forces. Patton strapped the 3 bodies to the hoods of his vehicles like hunting trophies and drove back to headquarters. Reporters loved it. "Bandits slain in pistol fight," read the headlines. Patton became famous overnight as a daring, gunslinging officer. Pershing was impressed. When the U.S. entered World War I in 1917, Pershing specifically requested Patton for his staff. Patton's response: "I don't want to be on anybody's staff. I want to command troops in combat." Pershing smiled. "What kind of troops?" "Tanks," Patton said immediately. "We need tanks." 1917, the birth of American armored warfare. When the U.S. entered World War I, the Army had 0 tanks. 0 tank crews. 0 tank doctrine. The British and French had been using tanks since 1916 with mixed results. Most officers saw them as expensive, unreliable novelties. Patton saw them as the future of warfare. He volunteered to establish the American Expeditionary Forces Tank Training School. At age 31, he became the first American officer to be designated Master of the Tank. He traveled to France, visited British and French tank units, studied their tactics and equipment. Then he wrote the first American manual on armored warfare. His key insight: tanks shouldn't support infantry. Infantry should support tanks. "The tank is the weapon of assault," he wrote. "Speed and shock are everything. A tank that stops is a tank that dies." The generals ignored him. Tanks, they said, should move slowly with infantry, providing mobile cover. Patton was building the doctrine that would win World War II. But in 1918, nobody was listening. September 26, 1918. Meuse-Argonne offensive. Colonel Patton commanded the U.S. Army's 1st Tank Brigade, 345 tanks, over 1,000 men. The offensive began at 5:30 a.m. Patton's tanks rolled forward into no man's land, through German artillery fire, heading for enemy positions. Within an hour, half the tanks had broken down. Mechanical failures. Stuck in mud. Engines overheating. Patton, watching from a command post, couldn't stand it. He ran forward into the battlefield on foot, directing traffic, helping push stuck tanks, organizing infantry to support the working vehicles. German machine guns opened fire. Men fell around him. Patton kept moving forward, completely exposed, waving his walking stick, shouting orders. An aide ran up to him. "Sir, you need to take cover." "Take cover." Patton laughed. "To hell with that. Haven't you read Homer? Heroes don't take cover." He believed it. Genuinely believed it. He was destined to die gloriously in battle, like the ancient warriors he'd read about as a child. Bullets couldn't kill him because his destiny wasn't complete yet. Then a German machine gun burst stitched across his legs. He fell, blood pouring from his thigh. A major artery was hit. He was going to bleed out in minutes. His aide dragged him to a shell crater. Patton, even while dying, kept shouting orders to nearby troops. "Keep moving. Don't stop for me. Take that machine gun nest." Medics arrived. They stopped the bleeding. He survived. When he woke up in the hospital, his first words were, "Did we take the objective?" They had. The battle was won. Patton received the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions. But more importantly, he had proven something to himself: he could lead from the front. He could inspire men through personal courage. And he wouldn't die until destiny was ready. 1918-1939. The wilderness years, World War I ended. The tanks were mothballed. The army shrank dramatically. Patton's passionate advocacy for armored warfare fell on deaf ears. For 20 years, he languished in peacetime posts. He studied. He wrote papers that nobody read. He watched from afar as German officers, men like Heinz Guderian, developed the panzer tactics that Patton had been advocating since 1918. He grew bitter. Frustrated. He was 55 years old and had never commanded troops in a major war. His greatest fear was that he would die having never fulfilled his destiny. "I was meant for war," he wrote in his diary. "Peace is my purgatory." His marriage suffered. His wife, Beatrice, loved him but couldn't understand his obsession with warfare. His children barely knew him. He was always away at some remote army post, and then, December 7, 1941, everything changed. Pearl Harbor. Patton heard the news on the radio. Japanese aircraft had destroyed the Pacific Fleet. America was at war. He was 56 years old. By Army regulations, he was approaching retirement age. Most officers his age were being pushed to desk jobs, but Patton called in every favor he had. He lobbied Eisenhower, who he'd known since West Point. He wrote directly to Army Chief of Staff George Marshall. "I'm too old to fight," he wrote. "The hell I am. I've been preparing for this war my entire life. Give me tanks and I'll show you how to win." Marshall, impressed by Patton's passionate advocacy and his reputation from World War I, gave him a chance, command of the 2nd Armored Division. Training troops for the invasion of North Africa, Patton threw himself into training with manic intensity. He drilled his troops constantly. He created elaborate mock battles. He personally checked uniforms, equipment, discipline. His soldiers thought he was insane. "We're training for war, not a parade," they complained, but Patton knew something they didn't: discipline under pressure keeps men alive. An army that maintains standards in camp will maintain standards under fire. When 2nd Armored deployed to North Africa in 1942, they were the best trained American unit in the theater, and they were about to face Rommel. February 1943. Kasserine Pass. The battle was a disaster. American forces, facing combat-hardened German veterans for the first time, broke and ran. Hundreds of Americans surrendered. Equipment was abandoned. It was the worst American defeat in the North African campaign. Eisenhower needed someone to restore order. He called Patton. "Can you fix this mess?" "Give me 2 weeks," Patton replied. He arrived at 2 Corps headquarters like an avenging angel. Officers who looked sloppy were fired on the spot. Soldiers who weren't wearing helmets were written up. Discipline was enforced ruthlessly. "You don't salute me for my benefit," he told assembled troops. "You salute the rank. You maintain standards because standards keep you alive when everything goes to hell." More importantly, he changed the tactical approach. No more defensive positions. No more reacting to German moves. "We're going to attack," he told his staff. "Always attack. The Germans respect aggression. Show them weakness and they'll destroy you. Show them strength and they'll retreat." Within 3 weeks, 2 Corps was attacking German positions. Within 2 months, Rommel was retreating, and Patton. He was promoted to command 7th Army for the invasion of Sicily, July 1943. Sicily, this is where Patton's genius truly showed. While Montgomery's forces moved cautiously up the east coast, Patton's tanks raced across the island at speeds nobody thought possible. But it wasn't just speed. It was innovation. When his columns encountered German roadblocks, Patton didn't stop to reduce them methodically. He bypassed them, leaving small forces to contain them while the main body kept moving. When his supplies ran low, he requisitioned from local sources: food, fuel, vehicles. His quartermasters learned to improvise. When his troops got tired, he rotated units through the advance, keeping fresh forces at the spearhead. It was blitzkrieg, American style. And it terrified the Germans. Where is Patton? German commanders kept asking, "Where is his army?" "Everywhere" was the only answer intelligence could provide. By the time Montgomery's forces reached Messina, Patton was already there, grinning, waiting. It was the peak of his career. And then came the slap, August 1943. The slapping incident, the full story, what the newspapers reported. Patton slapped a soldier suffering from shell shock. What actually happened was more complex. Private Charles Cole wasn't the only soldier Patton slapped. There was another incident a week later with Private Paul Bennett. Both times, Patton encountered soldiers with no visible wounds in hospitals full of critically injured men. Both times, he exploded with rage. But why? Here's what people don't understand. Patton wasn't angry at the soldiers personally. He was angry at what they represented. Patton had seen psychological casualties in World War I. He knew that combat stress was real, that men could break under pressure. But he also knew that if combat stress became an acceptable excuse to leave the battlefield, the entire army would collapse. "Every man is scared in combat," he explained later. "If we evacuate everyone who's scared, we won't have an army." He believed, genuinely, deeply believed, that showing compassion for psychological casualties would encourage more men to claim psychological trauma to escape danger. Was he right? Partially. Modern military psychology recognizes that PTSD is real and requires treatment. But Patton also understood something true: armies function because men overcome fear, not because they escape it. His method was wrong. Slapping soldiers was inexcusable. But his underlying concern, that an army must maintain morale even when men are terrified, wasn't entirely wrong. The tragedy is that Patton's moment of rage cost the Allies his leadership during D-Day, which cost lives in Normandy, June 6, 1944. D-Day, while Bradley's forces struggled on Omaha Beach, while soldiers died in the thousands in the Norman hedgerows, Patton sat in England, commanding an army that didn't exist. He listened to radio reports. He studied maps. He watched the offensive stall. "I could break that open in 3 days," he told his staff. They believed him. The Germans believed him. Even Eisenhower believed him, but Patton's punishment for the slapping incidents was to sit and watch while other men fought the battle he'd trained his entire life to lead. It was torture. Pure psychological torture, and when he was finally called to France in July, when Third Army was activated and given operational control, Patton exploded with pent-up energy. August 1944. The Great Pursuit, what Patton did in August 1944 has never been equaled in military history. In 30 days, Third Army advanced 600 miles, liberated 47 major cities, captured 65,000 German prisoners, destroyed 6 German divisions, consumed 750,000 gallons of fuel per day. The advance was so fast that supply lines couldn't keep up. Patton's tanks literally ran out of gas while driving because fuel trucks couldn't reach them. One famous incident: a tank column stopped because they had no fuel. The tank crews siphoned gas from abandoned German vehicles. When that ran out, they commandeered French civilian cars and siphoned their fuel. When that ran out, they walked to the nearest farm and bought wine, then traded the wine to other American units for gasoline. Patton didn't just allow this improvisation. He encouraged it. "If you stop because you're out of gas, you're not trying hard enough," he told his commanders. "Find gas. Steal it. Make it. I don't care. But keep moving." The German army was in full retreat. Berlin was vulnerable. The war could end by Christmas, and then Eisenhower stopped him. September 1944. The fuel crisis. Official explanation: Third Army had outrun its supply lines. Fuel and ammunition needed to be conserved and redistributed to Montgomery's forces in the north, who were planning Operation Market Garden. Patton's explanation: Monty convinced Ike to give him priority so he could have his moment of glory. The truth was probably somewhere in between. The Allied logistics system was strained. But the decision to stop Patton's advance, which was succeeding, and give resources to Montgomery's untested airborne operation, which would fail catastrophically, remains one of the most controversial decisions of the war. Patton's tanks sat immobile for 3 weeks while Montgomery's forces were destroyed at Arnhem. "We lost the war in September 1944, Patton said bitterly. "We could have been in Berlin by October. Instead, we sat and waited while the Germans rebuilt their defenses." He was right. The Siegfried Line, which could have been bypassed in September, became a fortress by November. The Battle of the Bulge, which happened in December, might never have happened if Third Army had been allowed to continue east. Thousands of Allied soldiers died because of that decision. Patton never forgave Eisenhower for it. December 1944. Bastogne. Then came the moment that defined Patton's career. The moment that proved he was right about everything. The German offensive in the Ardennes caught everyone by surprise. Except Patton. "They're going to attack," he told his staff 3 days before it happened. Cornered animals always attack. He had 3 contingency plans ready. When Eisenhower called for help, Patton already knew which divisions to move, which routes to take, which supplies to requisition. "How soon can you attack north?" Eisenhower asked. 48 hours. The room of generals laughed. Moving an entire army 90 degrees in 2 days was impossible. Patton did it in 46 hours, and when his tanks broke through to Bastogne exactly when he promised, every general who had ever doubted him had to acknowledge the truth. George Patton was the best operational commander in the American Army, not the best strategist. That was probably Marshall. Not the best logistician. That was Bradley. Not the best diplomat. That was Eisenhower, but for taking an army and making it move faster, hit harder, and fight more aggressively than anyone thought possible. Patton had no equal. March 1945. The Rhine crossing. While Montgomery spent weeks planning his Rhine crossing, Operation Plunder, involving massive artillery preparation, airborne assaults, and elaborate deception plans, Patton just crossed. On March 22, 1945, Third Army elements crossed the Rhine in assault boats, secured a bridgehead, and began moving forces across before the Germans realized what was happening. Patton called Eisenhower. "We're across." "Across where?" "The Rhine. We crossed last night." Eisenhower was speechless. Patton continued, "Don't tell anyone yet. I want to surprise Monty. He's been planning his crossing for 3 weeks. I did it in 3 hours." The next day, Montgomery's elaborate operation began with enormous fanfare. Churchill himself came to watch, while photographers captured Montgomery's historic crossing. Patton's forces were already 20 miles into Germany, April 1945. The final drive, Third Army drove deep into Germany. They liberated concentration camps, Buchenwald, Ohrdruf. Patton personally toured Ohrdruf. He saw the mass graves, the gas chambers, the evidence of systematic genocide. He ordered every soldier in the area to tour the camp. "I want them to see what we're fighting against," he said. He also ordered civilians from nearby towns to visit the camp and bury the dead. "You claimed you didn't know," he told them. "Now you know." The experience affected him deeply. In letters to his wife, he wrote, "We are fighting pure evil. Not soldiers. Not an enemy army. Evil." But then, as Soviet forces approached from the east, Patton began to see another enemy. April 25, 1945. Elbe River. American and Soviet forces met at the Elbe. It was supposed to be a celebration. Patton saw something else. He saw Soviet treatment of German civilians. He saw the brutal occupation policies. He saw Stalin's forces taking over Eastern Europe not as liberators but as conquerors. He pulled aside American intelligence officers. "Are we tracking Soviet force deployments?" "Why would we do that, sir? They're our allies." "They won't be for long," Patton replied. "When this war ends, we're going to need to know where every Soviet division is positioned." He was openly talking about fighting the Soviets. Not hypothetically. Not as a distant possibility. As an immediate necessity. We should keep moving east, he told anyone who would listen. We should be in Prague. We should be in Berlin. We're letting the Soviets take everything. Eisenhower ordered him to stop at the Elbe. Not to advance further, Patton obeyed. Grudgingly. But he kept talking. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe, the war was over. Nazi Germany had surrendered unconditionally. Patton was given command of the occupation zone in Bavaria. His job: implement denazification, arrest war criminals, establish democratic governance. He did the opposite. He appointed former Nazi officials to administrative positions. When questioned, he said, "More than half the Germans were Nazis and we'd be in a hell of a fix if we removed all Nazi party members from office." He was photographed smiling with former Wehrmacht officers. He attended social functions with German aristocrats who had supported Hitler. The press crucified him. Patton coddles Nazis, read one headline. He didn't care. He was focused on what he saw as the real threat, the Soviet Union. "I would rather have a German division on my side than a Russian division," he said publicly. That's when the monitoring of his communications began, September 1945. The final interviews. Patton gave a series of interviews that sealed his fate. He called the denazification program Semitic revenge. He said the Nazi Party was, just like the Republican and Democratic parties back home. Jewish organizations demanded his removal. Politicians called for his court-martial. Eisenhower had no choice. Patton was relieved of command of Third Army and given a ceremonial position overseeing historical documentation. It was a humiliation. The greatest battlefield commander in American history, reduced to writing reports. But here's the crucial detail: Patton didn't accept the demotion quietly. He planned to return to the United States and speak publicly about the Soviet threat. He planned a book tour, radio interviews, speeches to veterans organizations. He was going to become a political advocate for immediate war with the Soviet Union. American intelligence agencies knew this. They were monitoring his plans, and that's when things get very, very suspicious. December 8, 1945. The day before, Patton spent his last full day of health finishing paperwork, meeting with staff officers, and planning his departure for the United States. He told his secretary, "I have a feeling I won't make it home." She laughed. "Don't be superstitious, General." "It's not superstition," he replied. "Just a feeling." That evening, he had dinner with Major General Hobart Gay, his chief of staff and closest friend. They talked about the future. About retirement. About what Patton would do as a civilian. "I'm going to tell the American people the truth about the Soviets," Patton said. "Someone has to." Gay warned him, "George, you're going to make powerful enemies." "I already have," Patton replied. They agreed to go pheasant hunting the next day. One last adventure before Patton left Germany forever. Neither of them knew they were being watched. December 9, 1945. 11:45 a.m. The accident happened in seconds. The truck turned. The Cadillac couldn't stop in time. The impact. Patton's head snapped forward into a metal partition. His neck broke. He was conscious. Paralyzed. "Come. This is it," he said quietly to Gay. "My last battle." At the hospital, doctors confirmed the worst: cervical fracture, complete paralysis. He would never walk again. Patton took the news stoically. "How long do I have?" "You could live for years," the doctor said. "With proper care." "No," Patton interrupted. "I won't live as a cripple. I'm a soldier. I'll die as a soldier." For 12 days, he lay in that hospital bed, conscious, unable to move. Visitors came. His wife flew from America. Eisenhower visited, tears in his eyes. Patton's last words to Eisenhower were, "You were right. I should have kept my mouth shut." December 21, 1945. 5:50 p.m., General George S. Patton Jr. died peacefully in his sleep. Or so the official report said. His personal physician later claimed the death was sudden and unexpected. Patton had been stable, even improving. No autopsy was performed. The body was embalmed within hours, making forensic investigation impossible. He was buried in Luxembourg, among his soldiers, in a military cemetery where thousands of white crosses marked the graves of Third Army casualties. His funeral was attended by thousands. Soldiers who had served under him. Officers who had hated him. Civilians who had been liberated by his forces. Eisenhower gave the eulogy. He was one of the most brilliant soldiers America has ever produced. Aggressive, daring, and completely fearless. His legacy will endure as long as armies remember how to win. What Eisenhower didn't say: Patton's death was awfully convenient for a lot of powerful people. The evidence of assassination. Let's look at the facts coldly. Motive: Patton was planning to return to America and become a vocal critic of US-Soviet relations. He had a huge public following. His speeches could have influenced American foreign policy at a crucial moment. Opportunity: he was in a foreign country, surrounded by intelligence operatives, with limited personal security. The accident: perfectly positioned to injure only Patton, not kill him outright, allowing for a natural death in hospital that would avoid suspicion. The truck driver, never punished, never investigated thoroughly, disappeared from Army records. The death: sudden deterioration after days of stability. No autopsy. Immediate embalming. Douglas Bazada's confession. A former OSS operative claimed in 1979 that he was ordered to kill Patton. His story contained details not publicly known. Context: the OSS, later CIA, had carried out political assassinations before. Operation Paperclip, Operation Gladio. American intelligence was willing to do dark things in the name of national security. Is it proof? No. Proof would require documents that were either never created or have been classified for 80 years, but is it suspicious? Absolutely. The alternative explanation: maybe it really was just an accident. A tragic, random accident. Patton was 60 years old. He had survived 2 world wars, multiple injuries, decades of hard living. Maybe his time had simply come. Maybe the truck driver really didn't see the Cadillac. Maybe Patton's sudden death was from complications, not foul play. Maybe Bazada was lying for attention. Maybe, but here's what we know for certain: Patton predicted the Cold War. He was right about Soviet intentions. He was right that Eastern Europe would be enslaved. He was right that America would regret stopping at the Elbe. Everything he said in those final months proved accurate within 5 years, and the people who silenced him, whether through accident or assassination, ensured that his warnings came too late. The legacy: today, George S. Patton is remembered as a great general. His name is synonymous with aggressive, decisive leadership, but his full story is more complex. He was a man out of his time, a warrior poet in an age of bureaucratic warfare. He believed in glory, honor, and destiny in a world that was moving toward total war and mutual assured destruction. He was right about tanks. Right about speed. Right about aggression. Right about the Soviets. He was wrong about shell shock being cowardice. Wrong about Nazi Party members being harmless. Wrong about thinking he could speak truth to power without consequences. In the end, what killed George Patton wasn't a truck accident or a Soviet assassin or a CIA plot. What killed him was being right too soon, too loudly, to people who didn't. The final irony. In 1970, the movie Patton, starring George C. Scott, was released. It won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. The film portrayed Patton as a brilliant, flawed, complex warrior, exactly what he was. But here's the irony: the movie was released at the height of the Vietnam War, when America desperately needed to believe in military victory, in strong leadership, in the possibility of winning wars. Patton's ghost became a symbol for a war-weary nation. The general who had been silenced in 1945 became a hero in 1970. And in 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, when the Soviet Union collapsed, when the Cold War ended exactly as Patton predicted it would, no one remembered that an old general had warned about all of it 44 years earlier. So what really happened on December 9, 1945? Option 1. Accident. A tired truck driver made a mistake. A freak impact caused the exact injury needed to paralyze Patton. 12 days later, he died from complications. Pure tragic coincidence. Option 2. Assassination, American intelligence, or Soviet agents, or some combination, arranged the accident to silence a political liability. The subsequent death in the hospital completed the operation. Option 3. Suicide. Patton, facing life as a paralyzed man, unable to be a soldier anymore, arranged his own death with medical assistance. His feeling the day before was premonition. He knew what he planned to do. We'll never know for certain. The witnesses are dead. The documents are classified or destroyed. The truth went to the grave with Patton, but maybe that's appropriate. Patton always said he believed in destiny. That he was meant to fight in great wars. That when his purpose was fulfilled, he would die. In 1945, World War II was over. The war with the Soviets hadn't started, and wouldn't be the kind of war Patton understood. There was no place for cavalry charges and tank columns in the nuclear age. Maybe Patton's destiny really was complete. Maybe the universe was done with him. Or maybe powerful men just decided he had become too dangerous to live. The men, the myth, the legend. George S. Patton Jr. died at age 60 in a hospital bed in Germany, unable to move, far from home, but in another sense, he never died at all. His tactics are still taught at military academies. His quotes are still repeated by officers. His legacy of aggressive, decisive leadership still influences how armies think about warfare, and every time someone argues for speed over caution, for attack over defense, for boldness over calculation, Patton's ghost is in the room. He wanted to be remembered as a warrior. He achieved that. He wanted to die in battle. He almost achieved that, dying from injuries sustained in what might have been his final fight. He wanted to warn America about the Soviet threat. He was silenced, but history proved him right. December 21, 1945. Luxembourg American Cemetery. A simple white cross. No elaborate monument. No grand statue, just George S. Patton Jr. General, 3rd Army, November 11, 1885, December 21, 1945. Buried among 5,000 American soldiers. Men who died under his command. Men who cursed his name and followed him into hell anyway. That's how he wanted it. Not separate from his soldiers. Not elevated above them. Just another soldier in the ground. But unlike the others, Patton's story didn't end with his death. It's still being told. Still being debated. Still inspiring and infuriating people 80 years later, because George Patton wasn't just a general. He was a force of nature. A warrior from another age. A prophet who saw the future and was punished for speaking about it, and whether he died in an accident or was murdered for knowing too much, one thing is certain: they couldn't kill what he represented, the idea that speed wins wars. That aggression defeats defense. That sometimes the greatest danger is not the enemy you're fighting, but the ally you're not fighting yet. Patton saw that in 1945. The world figured it out by 1950. But by then, the general who tried to warn everyone was 6 years dead. The end.